Welcome to the Devil's Advocates radio show. It ain't a 2 for Tuesday, not exactly, because Dom's doing Italy and Crute's flying solo. Well, that's not entirely true. I got E-Bone here with me in the Solidarity Realty Studios, WMDX, Madison, Wisconsin. E-Bone lightly screening your calls all day long, just a little bit, a skosh. And you can join us. And I'm going to need your help today. I'm not exactly flying solo because you're going to join me on the phones at 844-967-2789. And also a friend of the Devil's, John Nichols. And E-Bone, I don't know if you know, Blade asked for John Nichols. It's been a busy day around here, but I was reading the headlines at the Capital Times here locally where John is the associate editor. And John is declaring Scott Walker the biggest loser of the spring elective cycle. And I read no further. I just dialed John and said, John, please, let's Walker bash a little bit today. We'll share with you. John joining at 4:30. Can't wait. And I mentioned, Dom's gone, probably in no small part, a planned vacation, but it's moving day. It's moving day for Mad Radio. We're moving. The announcer's been telling you guys for a while. Broadcasting live from State Street. Not exactly true. Not yet. Getting there. Moved today. At least the administrative offices and all the functionality and all the furniture, mostly, except this studio, we moved into the new space, 200 State Street, right down above the Comedy Club on State and across from the Overture Center, Dayton and State Street. I'm feeling great about being on State, radio on State, feeling great. So we are living through a little bit of chaos in the shortest of run. And Dom saw that as a good time to exit stage left.
Just going to duck out for a little bit.
So him and the beautiful Mrs. Salvi, I hope they have a wonderful romantic trip to Italy, and I will be envious of them the entire time. But let me ask you. E-Bone, I suspect you're still a younger guy.
Oh, yeah.
Moving day. Are you still in the get a pickup truck?
100%. 100%.
And call 6 of your former best friends.
One of them shows up, and then, yeah, over 2 days, it's always 2 days. You move your entire life from one place to another. And it's exhausting. I'm
2
over
days?
it.
2 days. No, never 2 days.
See, and it's just, we never move more than 7 or 8 miles. That's part of it.
You can't move in stages, man. You can't move in leaps and starts and carloads and armfuls. That's a horrible way to move. I know, I've done it many times, but it's a horrible way to move out there in the world. I'd also be curious. We're going to talk about some of the political headlines of the day. But today was moving day. Not the worst move that I've ever experienced. Actually, Mad City Movers here in Madison. Pretty impressed with the service we got. Second time they've moved our company. Strangely, second time they've moved my company in like 18 months. We moved in here like 18 months ago, E-Bone, growing. It was Devil Radio back
I'm going to
then.
miss this place.
Well, we're not going to miss it yet. We're still broadcasting from here.
True.
Still building out the engineering at the downtown studios, but the office structure is up and running. And I got to tell you, maybe it's my propensity to want to move every item in the house or the office, because I've been a small business owner for a number of years, and I've moved those as well. It's no more fun, no easier. Instead of calling up your friends, at least you can encourage the staff, please, at least pack your desks. You're not fired unless you fail to pack your desk. Then you might be fired. Pack your desk. Most do. Everyone did. In fact, I was the guy with the armloads of crap this morning. The mover gave me a big box. He's like, put your loose items here. He says it with, not disdain, but a little disdain, because I'm making his life tougher. But I get this bright idea. When my wife and I and our kids were still small then, when we moved into our current house in Middleton, and I hired like a couple of guys with the truck, and they have a name, something similar to that. And somehow they were misdirected or didn't show up for like an hour, the whole first hour. Well, I only had these guys for like 3 or 4 hours. So they barely got the furniture packed in the truck. And there was tons of stuff that did not make it on the truck the first time through. And they unloaded the truck and they said, well, that's all the time we've got allocated. We've got other projects.
Oh, come on
move.
now.
Yeah. Like they no longer had enough time to move and put the second load in the truck.
No.
And so one of the guys, and did I mention it was about 95 degrees that day, just a particularly hot, humid summer day in June. And so anyways, what am I going to do? And, you know, my wife still got a handful with these two toddler age kids at the time. So as much as she may have wanted to be helped, she wasn't going to be the one. And I long since prideful Crute and short on friends, I've moved beyond the point of inviting friends to help me move. I've just learned my lessons through being invited too many times myself. Big guy, strong bag. Hey, Crute will help. I've helped many, many times. But anyways, that day, I had to pay the one kid cash. And I think I had to go rent a U-Haul. And he and one of the guys working side hustle style that night in the dark loaded up the rest of the stuff. And over the course of that day, I lost, and I'm not a skinny guy, but I lost about 10 pounds.
It's a ton of work. I was only half joking when I said I'm sort of over it. It's a ton of work. It burns you out. Moving more than every 2 years would be ideal, right? There was a period where my wife and I would move, I don't know, about every 2 years. And that seems like a good chunk of time, but I was over it, just done with it.
You know, at least I've never done the cross-country move.
Exactly.
I have with my mom. We did, when I was a kid, we did a cross-country move in the U-Haul, went across the Appalachian Mountains and moved to North Carolina. But I've never done that to my family. But I understand a few people have moved cross-country and then the movers take their life's possessions hostage. I'd be curious. Got a few political headlines. Got a fine guest coming at 4:30. John Nichols from The Nation, from the Cap Times locally. But what's the worst moving experience you've ever had? 844-967-2789. See if John wants to talk headlines or worst move ever, John. Which is it? Welcome, John from Boaz.
Yeah, I'm kind of like the last time I moved was the worst because, you know, the cause and effect of psychology. Well, my house burned down.
Oh, no, John.
So I had to move. I had no choice. You know, I lived in the tent city for about 2 months. That was it.
Wow.
So I bought the good old Boaz feed mill, and I'm turning it into a nice shop for all my toys. Do you know anybody who wants to buy a tugboat?
A tugboat. Is it seaworthy, John?
Yeah. You bet. Guaranteed, just like the Titanic. Unsinkable.
You know, the best 2 days of owning a boat, you know, the day you buy it and the day you sell it.
You know, I was thinking that there's only 3 things about moving.
Yes, sir.
The worst 3 things for a woman's lifetime is getting a divorce, a death in the family, or moving.
Certainly amongst the most stressful days, and can be amongst you know, things like losing a family member. Moving can be very stressful. I remember when I was a kid, John, it was tough. Last question for you, quick, buddy. So is this tugboat in a navigable body of water? Could it be moved? Because, you know, I'm down for strange and unusual trades, John. Would you take a trade for it?
I'll take you out and show you the ropes on a calm day.
Which body of water, John?
Well, I'm looking at Governor's State Park or Redstone up in Redstone is way up in Saw County.
Well, John, I'm sorry to cut you short, my friend. I was going to say, John, you, sir, might be more serious about this tugboat adventure than I. But if we could drag Dom along, maybe we could partner in this endeavor. We could. What would you do with the tugboat, though? You know what I mean? Like, do you move other boats? Do you try to do commercial ventures?
Yeah.
Because tugboats are slow. You can't go out and take them fishing or something, right? Can't water ski behind a tugboat, presumably. Maybe I'm wrong. Couple of outboards on the back, just big old Evan Roods, let her rip. E-Bone, one of the political headlines of the day, and if you'd like to talk politics, between here and John Nichols coming at 4:30 Central Time, and John's big headline of the day, effectively Scott Walker, the biggest loser of the spring elective cycle, but perhaps our friends to the south, the Windy City, got the DNC for 2024. And some of you are new friends. You haven't known the Devil's Advocates forever, but we did a lot of lobbying and advocating for the DNC to come to Milwaukee in 2020.
Talked about it many times. Yeah.
I mean, we had Tom Perez, the former DNC chairman. Tom Perez was a Milwaukee boy. Not only did he get married on Brady Street, the guy honeymooned. He did the rehearsal dinner. He did the bachelor party. They did the old style wedding, and most of it was Brady Street, where we had our very first little radio station. I remember moving into that place. Today went a little smoother, I got to tell you. Professional movers. I hardly sore at all. I will be tomorrow, though, I suspect. Come back with us. Chicago, the recipient of the Democratic National Convention 2024, partying a little south of us. I hate to go to Chicago. No, that's not true. I like the party in Chicago. Just don't like the football team there much. Did I mention the Bears still suck? Dom's gone. You can be part of this big show today. In his absence, he's a European vacationing. He'll be back next week. I'll be back after this short break. You'll stick around the whole time and join us on the phones. 844-967-2789. Hot political takes coming soon.
Look through your children's eyes to see the true magic of a forest. It's a storybook world for them. You look and see a tree. They see the wrinkled face of a wizard with arms outstretched to the sky. They see treasure in pebbles. They see a windy path that could lead to adventure. And they see you, their fearless guide through this fascinating world.
Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Self-monitor your blood pressure in 4 easy-to-remember steps. Self-monitoring is power. Visit managerbp.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the American Heart Association, and the American Medical Association, in partnership with the Office of Minority Health and Health Resources and Services Administration.
The Devil's Advocates, the fix for political junkies everywhere.
You recall the Capitol insurrection? A post-ABC News poll showed 54% said Trump should be criminally charged for inciting the riot. That's like a litany of criminal allegations against the former president. You can say it's all partisanship and a witch hunt, but there wasn't one credible accusation against Obama during his entire 8-year term. So how Republicans just ignore all the evidence? I mean, he was perpetrating a coup on multiple levels.
Follow the Devil's Advocates on Facebook and Twitter.
Did you know your favorite shows and hosts are active on social media too? Find Civic Media on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook and be part of the conversation happening there. And go to our website, civicmedia.us, to learn more about the Civic Media Network.
Here's your Mad Radio forecast. Mainly clear skies tonight with a low of 55. Winds out of the southwest 10 to 15 miles an hour. Ample sunshine expected tomorrow, high of 80. Clear skies and quiet again tomorrow night. Lows level off around 57. Dry with temps well above average Thursday and Friday, and highs in the upper 70s. For Civic Media, I'm meteorologist Eric Height. Currently, it's 76 degrees.
The Devil's Advocates, because freedom.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show, a Tuesday edition. Your calls, welcome here, 844-967-2789. Mad Radio Moving Day, Civic Media Moving Day. We've been growing this little enterprise, and we've, been sticking 10 pounds of you-know-what in a 5-pound bag. And today, the seams burst, and we moved our operations up to State Street. And it was a pretty compact, pretty efficient move. We've still got some of the broadcast operations here on the University Ave studios. So, we didn't move every last item. which probably saved us a couple hours. But we moved the vast majority of our operation so we can get our efficient, warm, fuzzy blanket of truth network going uptown. And I'm just curious if anyone's had a disastrous moving day. You know, I had one bad one, just sweated my you-know-what's off and lost like 10 pounds. Probably good for me. You know, I needed to lose the 10 pounds. But anyways, that, and here's a political headline, or at least an opinion piece. Dave Zawiefel over at the Cap Times. Shunning federal funds is killing rural hospitals. And this could be the case to disastrous ends here in the state of Wisconsin. I want to read some from this opinion piece. Our friend John Nichols from the Cap Times coming soon. While everyone was focused on this past week's elections and their aftermath, interesting information about Medicaid, the nation's healthcare program for the poor, went largely unnoticed. Oh, I noticed. The New York Times ran a detailed report on how Mississippi's refusal to expand Medicaid in the state is driving its already financially shaky rural hospitals out of business. Well, Scott Walker was turning us into Mississippi. I read on, though. One rural 208-bed hospital that serves the state's impoverished Delta region is down to just 13 inpatients. Its intensive care unit and maternity ward have closed due to lack of staffing. All signs, the story said, of a hospital ravaged by too many poor patients who have no health coverage. The hospital CEO resigningly said it had lost $17 million last year alone and is nearly out of its cash reserves, adding, "We're going away. It's happening." Rural hospitals are struggling all over the nation because of population declines, soaring labor costs, and a long-term shift towards outpatient care, the story said. But those problems have been magnified by a political choice in Mississippi and 9 other states, all with Republican-controlled legislatures, who have stubbornly refused to expand Medicaid coverage under the Affordable Care Act, which became law more than a dozen years ago. So 40 states have done so. 10 states have refused. Which column do you think Wisconsin's in? I'm going to read more. Guess who is one of those states? No other than our own, at least if you're listening from Wisconsin. Well, Wisconsin's Badger Care, our name for Medicaid, is somewhat more inclusive than the other GOP-controlled states. Tens of thousands of Wisconsin citizens are still left without health coverage and would otherwise be covered if the state legislature would act. By spurting expansion, Wisconsin has left already struggling rural hospitals to shoulder the added cost because they cannot legally turn away patients, insured or not. According to the Times story, states that opted against Medicaid expansion or had just recently adopted it accounted for nearly 3/4 of rural hospital closures between 2010 and 2021, according to the American Hospital Association. Fortunately, only one Wisconsin rural hospital has been forced to close during those years, but many claim to be hanging on by a thread and have had to shut down some services, forcing residents to travel long distances to get care. Meanwhile, New York Times columnist Paul Krugman reported earlier this week that there's a significant difference between, listen closely, folks, this is stark. There is a significant difference between the life expectancy in states that have accepted the Affordable Care Act's expanded Medicaid and the few remaining states that haven't. Ironically, it's been the poorest states that have refused to take the federal funds and have suffered the biggest drop in life expectancy. Mississippi, we started there. It's the worst. Wisconsin is about middle of the 50 states. It's 77.7 years. But my home state has seen its life expectancy drop 1.6 years between 2019 and 2020. Across the state, 1.6 years. That's a lot of prematurely dead Wisconsinites. And people who live, our neighbors to the west in Minnesota, which was one of the first to accept Medicaid expansion, they can expect to live nearly 2 years longer than people in Wisconsin do. That's on average. That makes sense because it's uninsured poor who put off seeing a doctor while those with a coverage are more likely to seek treatment. Wisconsin's legislative Republicans followed then Governor Scott Walker's lead to spur the expansion because they believed it would signal support for so-called Obamacare, which they opposed. Wanker hated it, didn't he? Meanwhile, the state has lost out on $1.6 billion every 2 years in federal funds. 1.6 times 6 people. 6 budgets we've been through without Medicaid expansion. 1.6 billion every 2 years in federal funds that could go to increase fees to rural hospital, solving 2 problems on one fell swoop. Governor Tony Evers is trying again in his budget proposal. The question is, will Wisconsin join the other 40 states or stay in bed with Mississippi? It's shameful. We are Mississippi, or at least we were under the governance of Scott Walker. Now, they've lost the governor's mansion, but the Republicans are still malfeasant because they don't care about their constituents. They don't care about the bad outcomes. People are literally dying in the state of Wisconsin without cause for lack of health insurance, which would be provided to them with federal dollars if Republicans didn't have to what? Show they oppose Obamacare? I think you've accomplished that goal. Mission accomplished. Expand Medicaid now. Come back with us. We got a fine guest joining us. He is John Nichols from The Nation, from the Cap Times. John's headline that caught my attention: Scott Walker is the biggest loser. The most unforgivable, indefensible part of it was his failure to expand Medicaid. Tony Evers, by the way, joins the Empowered Caregiver Show on Wednesday night. Tune in tomorrow at 7. More of us with John Nichols next.
I mean, Madison is the home of Bratfest and the World Naked Bike Ride. It makes sense we'd call it home, too. Mad Radio 92.7 WMDX.
ABC News, I'm Marina Roy. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg has filed a lawsuit against House Representative Jim Jordan to stop, quote, a transparent campaign to intimidate and attack Bragg's criminal prosecution of former President Trump. The lawsuit makes specific mention of threats Bragg has endured since Trump posted on social media about the prospect of being indicted. In Kentucky, a day after a gunman opened fire at Old National Bank in downtown Louisville, Police Chief Jacqueline Gwynn Villarroel says the suspected shooter, Craig Sturgeon, was an employee of the bank.
He purchased the weapon legally from one of the local dealerships here in Louisville.
5 people died and 3 are still hospitalized, including a rookie police officer. The Justice Department has filed an appeal in a case involving the abortion drug mifepristone, challenging a Texas judge's ruling to ban the FDA-approved pill. The drug has been used for more than 2 decades. This is ABC News.
Civic Media radio stations, providing your news, conversations, and fun you won't find anywhere else.
For Civic Media, I'm Jane Matnair. Here's what you need to know. After 86 years of serving students, Milwaukee's Cardinal Stritch University is closing at the end of this spring semester. President Dan Schultz citing falling enrollments, the COVID-19 pandemic, and an ongoing need for more resources. The school will offer some resources over the summer to help students who are close to finishing their graduation requirements, and is also working with other local universities for students who want to transfer their credits. About a third of undergrads at Cardinal Stritch are Pell Grant recipients, which are awarded to those who are most in need. If you do your taxes online, be careful that hackers don't steal your refund or your information. You want to file through a credible website or an app. Don't do your taxes on a public Wi-Fi network. And remember, the IRS will never send you a text or an email about your refund. I'm Jane Matnair. This is Civic Media News.
The birds are chirping, the weather is changing, and the scent of this is in the air again. That's right, Knucklehead CBD and vapes are celebrating this 420 season just right. Whether you shop online at knuckleheads.shop or go into their store, they are now offering their 420 discount, which is up to 25 to 50% off all flower, pre-roll CBD edibles, and all disposables this Thursday through Sunday. So shop online at knuckleheads.shop today or stop on into their Madison and Milwaukee locations, 550 State Street in Madison and 2949 North Oakland Avenue in Milwaukee.
Hey folks, Stephanie Miller here. As an enlightened progressive, you know how important it is to do business in accordance with your politics. That's why Solidarity Realty is my favorite real estate firm in Madison. Solidarity Realty is a local independent realty company that lives their values. They provide outstanding expertise and protect your best interests while building community and promoting sustainability and diversity. Vive la resistance! Find them today at solidarityrealty.com. And don't forget, tell them Stephanie Miller sent you.
Hey, this is Corey Bank at Mad Radio 92.7 WMDX. At Civic Media, we love our local communities and want to share your stories. Submit your local event and we'll let our listeners know. Email me at corey.bank@civicmedia.us.
Getting a new computer is both fun and terrifying for many people. Madison Computer Works makes moving to a new computer easy. We help protect it from malware and scammers. We move your data and reinstall programs. Our computer care plan lets our friendly techs assist you remotely once you bring it home. Already bought a new computer? Try building one from parts you ordered online. You have better things to do with your time than set up or fix your computer. We'll get everything working right. Call the pros at 608-231-8000 and make your computer problems disappear. Madison Computer Works. Computers that work for you.
The big and tall of political talk. The Devil's Advocates.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates radio show. Tuesday already. I wish it were Friday, but Tuesday is good enough when you got a good, fine guest joining you like John Nichols from The Nation and the Cap Times. John, I appreciate you filling the little shoes of Dom. He left his little shoes behind. But thanks for joining us, buddy.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be with you. I noticed you were playing the song Loser by Beck.
Well, we were.
The intro music.
We were. Not for you, of course, John Nichols. You're always a winner.
Well.
But your headline, I found it quite captivating. Your opinion piece at the Cap Times. Scott Walker was the biggest loser on April 4th. You know, I was just reading from Dave Zwiefel's column, the shutting of federal funds killing rural hospitals. Well, Scott Walker, his governance, it was a lot about hating on Obamacare, and really it was at the expense of the people of the state of Wisconsin. John, we continue to suffer from the bad leadership of Scott Walker, do we not?
Oh, I don't know. I just took the train up to Minneapolis, and that was great.
I went to Minneapolis last weekend. I had to drive, John.
Oh, I guess it was a magical train that didn't ever come because Scott Walker cut off the money for it. But I was using the internet up north. Oh, no, he cut off the federal money for that, too. And you're right. Scott Walker, because of his rigid ideology, was literally willing to deny Wisconsinites things that they needed, like transportation, communications, and healthcare. So right off the bat, he's a bad guy. And then he kind of, took away our labor rights, undermined our voting rights, and gave us gerrymandered maps. So on balance, not going to get the highest marks from me.
Yeah, but he brought us Foxconn, John. That worked out so well.
Almost.
John, of course, you tie Scott Walker into the electoral loss, and it was a big loss for Dan Kelly. Kelly was a Walker appointee to the court way back when Prosser retired, but he had already lost that appointment. He couldn't hold that short-term incumbency. He had already lost to Karofsky by 163,000 votes. But of course, Scott Walker, he was still endorsing his former appointee this round, wasn't he, John?
Oh, yeah. He was out campaigning for him. I mean, he was very, very active as a Dan Kelly backer. In fact, I think it's safe to say that Dan Kelly's success owed a lot to Scott Walker because Scott Walker campaigned for him personally, tweeted about, he's all over social media talking about how vital it was that Dan Kelly won. And then he wrote pieces for the Washington Times, the conservative paper out in Washington, on Kelly's campaign. He was, pretty much everywhere that something could be said about Kelly, he was doing it. And I think it's fair to say that Wisconsinites probably noticed that. I'm sure that helped Kelly a lot.
Well, of course, it didn't lift Kelly to electoral victory. Now, I found Kelly to be a particularly contemptuous sort of man as a candidate. We knew that the last time. And John, it seems to be that Republicans continue to embrace, I don't want to say unelectable candidates because sometimes they win, but just they're really not likable human beings, and their positions don't reflect the majority positions of the state of Wisconsin, do they?
Nope, they do not. I think, look, you had a pretty pure test with the Protasiewicz versus Kelly race, right? Because Protasiewicz was very open about her positions on the issues. She said she would talk about her values, not about cases, but her values. And those values included supporting a right to choose, supporting labor rights, arguing for democracy as opposed to gerrymandered maps. I mean, she was clear on where she was at. People didn't have any question on the economic, the political issues going into the campaign. Kelly tried to play a, kind of a silly game, right? And say, oh, I don't have any opinions. But somehow every right-wing group in Wisconsin figured out that despite the fact that he said he didn't have opinions, his opinions were probably the same as theirs. And so you had real clarity in this race. A candidate of the right, a candidate of the left, a candidate backed by the Republicans, a candidate backed by the Democrats. Both of them at the start of the race, relatively unknown. Even though Kelly had run statewide, I don't think most people knew him that well. Huge amount of money spent, most expensive judicial race in the history of the state, of the nation. And what did they do? People decided by 200,000 vote margin, 11 points, that they favored Janet Protasiewicz. That's a pretty clear signal that the combination of Dan Kelly and the conservative brand just isn't working in Wisconsin. And I would point out that that's not just Madison and Milwaukee County. Janet Protasiewicz would have won the state of Wisconsin even if Dane County wasn't voting, right? It would have been a closer margin, but she would have won even without Dane County. So she won statewide. And the important thing to understand is that many of the counties where she won, the 27 counties that she won around the state, are places that voted for Scott Walker in the past, that voted for Donald Trump in the past. And clearly, a lot of people have started to have second thoughts. And that's not just in liberal areas or even moderate areas. If you look at places like Walworth County, and that Walworth County, historically one of the most Republican counties of the state, historically one of the most conservative counties of the state, 45% of the people voted for Janet Protasiewicz. Up in some of the suburban counties around Milwaukee, you got up to 47, 48% for Protasiewicz. And so she was winning, not just in liberal areas, but in some rather more conservative areas.
John, how much of that do you think, sir, is attributable to the Dobbs, the overturning of Roe v. Wade? And you talked about Protasiewicz, making a clear case for where she stood. I'd be curious. Do you think that Justice Rebecca Dallett first set that example as a candidate of the left, if you will? She had a primary against Tim Burns, I believe, and she came out more clearly than many candidates historically did. And I think it was a good example. And I think to a lesser degree, Karofsky followed it. And to a greater degree, I think Protasiewicz followed that example with success. John, is that they don't hide from their positions like they used to.
That's exactly right. And historically, when you ran for the Supreme Court, you kind of did a dance, right? You winked and nodded rather than actually saying things. Janet Protasiewicz, born and raised in Milwaukee, I think just came out of the Milwaukee County DA's office, serving as a judge in Milwaukee County. I just think she's a little more blunt, right? A little more, plain spoken. She doesn't want to play games. And so from the start, she said, I'm going to talk about my values. I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from. If you don't like it, obviously you won't vote for me. If you do like it, you will. And what happened was that I think her values aligned very much with where Wisconsin's at. Polling shows, for instance, on the issue of reproductive rights, that, well into the 60s, 65, 66% of Wisconsinites are basically supportive of abortion rights. And in fact, when you talk about, at least a baseline support, protection for women in cases where health or other issues are involved, you get way up into the high 80s, close to the 90% support. So the right-wing stance of banning abortion, making it exceptionally hard for women to get abortions, even in very difficult circumstances, that's incredibly unpopular in Wisconsin. People don't like it. And so there she was right off the bat in a position that gave her a tremendous advantage, and I think especially with younger voters. Then, if you look at, for instance, the issue of labor rights. On labor rights, we have polling now that shows, someplace in the range of, high 60s, even 70% of Americans support labor rights. There's no reason to believe that Wisconsinites are roughly in line with that. So her stance, critical of Scott Walker's Act 10, was in touch with where Wisconsin was at. And then finally, on the issue of gerrymandering, you will not find a poll anywhere that tells you that people like gerrymandering. In fact, that's Democrats, independents, and even Republicans tell you it's a bad thing. It's bad for democracy, it's bad for representation. And so when she was criticizing gerrymandered maps, again, she's speaking directly to where the people of Wisconsin are at. So, Kelly just didn't have an issue. He had nothing to work with. He went with hyper-negative, attacking Janet Protasiewicz, suggesting that somehow she was going to impose her will on the state, as if he wasn't going to do that. When in fact, what Protasiewicz is arguing was going back to a traditional balance, right, where the court, heard cases, but it didn't go to extreme partisan positions as it has over the last 12 years, 15 years since conservatives took charge.
Folks, you are listening to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. Got a fine guest live via phone. He is John Nichols from The Nation, from the Cap Times. I'm reading his latest. Let me get the headline right. I like this one. Scott Walker was the biggest loser on April 4th. And John, you make reference in this piece that you wrote to the voting margins, especially in like the UW-Madison campus area. Some polling stations 10-1 advantage for Protasiewicz. But the takeaway, the postmortem, the Scott Walker takeaway was, well, of course, it's liberal college professors. They've indoctrinated our children. Something like that, right, John?
Yeah, it's a lot of indoctrination if you get to a 10-1 margin, right? But no, I don't think it was liberal indoctrination. I think it was actually a conservative court, the U.S. Supreme Court that currently sits, when they reversed their 1973 Roe v. Wade precedent with the Dobbs decision in June of 2022, I think they sent a powerful signal that, A, of course, these issues are going back to the states, but B, this is up for grabs, that this question of whether women have a right to choose is going to be decided at the ballot box, at least in the short term, because the U.S. Supreme Court's not going to reverse its position. So state by state, you're going to have these battles. The evidence is from even more conservative states in Wisconsin, places like Kansas, that people are not comfortable with, they're not comfortable with a ban on abortion. That's coming through in Kentucky as well. It's coming through all over the country. In Wisconsin, which is a more traditional pro-choice state, that becomes an incredibly powerful issue. And then the power is multiplied, I think, among younger people for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is a much more practical issue for younger folks because obviously they face the question of whether they have a right to choose. These are folks who might be in a position where they would need reproductive health services. Secondly, I think that there's an idealism, a sense of, right and wrong. And it's quite clear that on balance, not all, of course, there are people that differ, but on balance, younger folks believe that bodily autonomy, as it's referred to, is something that ought to be protected, right? You ought to have a right to choose. And so that had a huge impact. And we talk a lot about young women, and there's no question, young women, I think, were driving a lot of this. But the fact is, I talked to young men on campuses, and they tended to share the position of support for, a right to choose. And so as a result, you got these astronomical margins. I don't think it's the only issue. I think young people have other issues that they're concerned about. But you had astronomical margins in campus districts, not just in Madison, where you saw those 10-1 margins, but up in Eau Claire, around UWM, around other campuses around the state. So the bottom line is, I think the issue played in a big way, but it didn't play in the way Scott Walker thought. Scott Walker had this fantasy, I think, that somehow if you just got enough information about Kelly's stance on the issues out, he would do better. I think that was exactly wrong. I think the more information that came out about where Kelly stood on the issues, the better Janet Protasiewicz did.
Well, John, of course, and we're coming to a break, John. My understanding is you're going to stick around, but Scott Walker, of course, assumes that somehow an anti-abortion stance is popular, and that if you just put the fear of God in these kids, somehow they would come to the conclusion that he has come to. John, like 30 seconds here.
Look, it's just not where the people of Wisconsin are. In fact, Scott Walker, on a host of issues, wasn't where the people of Wisconsin were. He was successful politically in a certain moment in history, I think, as a reaction to a lot of stuff going on in Washington, and frankly, with tremendous benefit from huge amounts of money coming in from the Koch brothers and other people. That doesn't play anymore because the Democrats have pretty much equal funding, and also because, on balance, what's happened over the last decade has suggested that the approach that Scott Walker took, which gave rise to the approach that Trump has taken, just isn't a very appealing approach. It doesn't have respect for democracy. It doesn't have respect for women. It doesn't have respect for labor.
John, hold that thought. More Devil's Advocates with John.
Finish your high school diploma for you and your family. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free adult education centers near you. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
The Devil's Advocates.
Hey, Jenny.
It's up to all of us. It's not just up to Democrats. Are we ready to rid our country of this perversion and deception? You know, are we sick of massacres at churches, grocery stores, theaters, concerts? Are we sick of adults forcing children who are raped into pregnancy? When is enough that we're going to vote out those fascists?
I'm putting you down for Caller Hall of Fame today. We have to carry these messages, even if the Democratic Party is incapable. You keep it up, sister.
Follow the Devil's Advocates on Facebook and Twitter.
Finish your high school diploma for you and your family. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free adult education centers near you. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Here's your Mad Radio forecast. Mainly clear tonight with lows around 55. Winds out of the southwest 10 to 15 miles an hour. Daytime highs approaching 80. Tomorrow, clear skies. Clear skies and quiet again tomorrow night. Lows level off around 57. Dry with temperatures well above average Thursday and Friday at highs in the upper 70s. For Civic Media, I'm meteorologist Eric Height. Currently, it's 76 degrees.
I'm a loser. I'm a loser.
The big and tall of political talk. The Devil's Advocates.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. We got a fine guest. He stuck around. He is John Nichols, our friend from the Cap Times, from the Nation. I love when John puts submissions out like the one he authored today. Scott Walker was the biggest loser on April 4th. I absolutely agree, even before I read the column. But John, let me ask you, I didn't see you specifically address it, or maybe I skimmed it too quickly, but the NRA and guns. And I've got a 19-year-old that voted this spring and has voted in a couple of elections now. My youngest will turn 18 between now and election day next November. I know Dominic's youngest just voted in her first race for Janet Protasiewicz. But I wonder, John, to your opinion, you've got kids. These kids are doing active shooter drills in school. Every night when they come home, if the parents have the news on, they hear about another mass shooting literally every day, John. How much do you think the issues and guns and Republicans sort of intransigence to do anything that is on the wrong side of the NRA or the Second Amendment, John?
No, I think it is an issue. And I think that it's an interesting issue because it doesn't necessarily top the list in most polling, right? Other issues, economics, right to choose, things like that tend to go higher on the polling list. But it's something that I think hovers over every race. And because there have been so many horrific mass shootings in the last, few weeks, I mean, it's coming at a terrible rate. Because of that, I think people are conscious of it, and it does figure into the mix. the NRA, of course, does most of its spending in a very targeted way. They communicate directly with their members, usually through direct mail. They don't do as much TV advertising and things like that. And so as a result, they tend to be mobilizing their own folks. But the fact of the matter is, if it's clear that one candidate is backed by the NRA, I think that doesn't help in the overall vote total, especially in Wisconsin. Remember, Wisconsin is a state that likes hunting, right? But the NRA has become increasingly identified in Wisconsin and nationally, not with hunting, but with the interest of the gun industry, with companies that want to sell a lot of guns, no matter what impact it has on society. And so I think that it's notable that in many counties where there's a lot of hunting, like northern Wisconsin counties, like Douglas, Bayfield, Ashland counties, those counties voted for Janet Protasiewicz by very wide margins, getting into the 60% range there. In southwestern Wisconsin, again, where there's a lot of hunting, places like Vernon County, is that they voted for Janet Protasiewicz by high margins. And so she was doing fine in areas where people own guns. And I think that's an important message, that responsible gun owners, I think increasingly are not that influenced by the NRA's messaging. And that's I think that was revealed by this election. I think it was revealed by the governor's election last year.
John Nichols, in part, Protasiewicz's campaign cast Dan Kelly through the prism of his participation in the false elector scheme and, sort of the anti-democratic overtone that sort of semi-fascistic coup attempt has. But do you think they have tied the issue of democracy in with the fair maps, the gerrymandering issue here in the state of Wisconsin? It was probably, behind the Dobbs decision, the second most referenced issue, I think, during the political campaign. John, it is my opinion that we don't have a one person, one vote sort of fair democracy when the maps are so gerrymandered in the state of Wisconsin. They clearly do not reflect the will of the voters, and therefore our legislators are completely unresponsive to the will of the voters, John. Until we solve that problem, I think every other problem is secondary, John, because you can't get to the solutions with Republican intransigence in a 2/3 majority that might start impeaching people.
Mm-hmm. Look, bottom line is that unless you have representative democracy, then it's only the courts that are going to decide issues. And obviously now we have a more liberal court, or one that will come in as a more liberal court. And that may, mitigate some issues. Perhaps the reproductive rights issue will be decided by the court. It's possible that this court might toss out some of the most rigorous anti-labor legislation. It's, there may be some good things that come from the court, but any kind of forward progress for society, any kind of, thoughtful budgeting, investment in public education, things like that, you're only going to get that if you have representative democracy. And we don't have that in Wisconsin right now. In fact, national surveys show Wisconsin to be, one of the least democratic states in the U.S. In fact, we're comparable to some very less than, fully realized democracies around the world. When you go to vote in most of Wisconsin, what you're going to find is that, it doesn't matter where you're at, it's just like a candidate, whatever. The district's going to vote. And locked in a great year, as they did in 2018, or a good year, as they did in 2020, 2022, it doesn't change anything. I mean, you still end up with essentially locked in Republican majorities. Even this year, you had the Supreme Court race. You had an open turnout for Protasiewicz. She did very, very well. And in District 8, where there was a special election, that district is so radically gerrymandered that you still ended up with a Republican narrowly winning it. And I think that's a reality we have to accept. I think Wisconsinites don't like it. They have every reason to dislike it. It makes our elections kind of ridiculous at the lower level, at least at the legislative level. And so, yeah, I think there's a motivation for a change there. If the Supreme Court, this new Supreme Court, were to take up a gerrymandering case and toss out the existing maps and either order a draw of new maps or do the draw themselves, I think that would be incredibly popular with the people of Wisconsin. I don't think they have any risk there at all.
John Nichols, have you thought through, and we're down to our last 90 seconds, John, the timeline? We know there's a threatened piece of litigation coming from Fair, was it Fair Wisconsin? Law Forward, my bad.
Law Forward, yep.
So we know there is potentially a suit coming, John, that could be the vessel of trying to put this before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. If everything goes well, John, what's that look like? Would we have different maps in 2024, or is that far too optimistic from a timeline perspective?
It's not too optimistic, but it is something you have to recognize is, it's a difficult thing. They have to thread a needle here. If the case comes up before August 1st, when Janet Prosay was sworn in, it's very possible that the current court would grab it and then try and rule in a way that would block reform. So you got to file it after January 1st, or I'm sorry, after August 1st, my apologies. And then, hope that it moves quickly to this court, that this court will take it and frankly move in a rapid but responsible way. And this is something I want to counsel on. If they don't do it right, then they could face a federal court challenge on it. And so it's a really delicate maneuver, but it's pretty clear that the 4 liberal justices on this court are committed to a pro-democracy agenda and to addressing gerrymandering. So I don't rule it out. I think it would be, kind of like everything has to go right for this to have new maps for the 2024 election. Remember, they would have to be in place by April of 2024 when the petitioning begins to get on the ballot. So that's a challenge, but not beyond the realm of possibility.
John Nichols, always appreciate when you come around. Final 30 seconds, John. Will I see you at the DNC in Chicago in 2024, sir? Will we?
Absolutely. Come on. Chicago's a great town for a convention. And and they got a great new mayor. So, everything seems to be headed in the right direction for Chicago.
Well, Milwaukee's got a great new mayor too, John.
Will we see each other in Milwaukee is the bigger question.
We will. Or Devils.
No Wisconsin resident should ever have to be without heat, water, or power. The Keep Wisconsin Warm, Cool Fund and your local energy assistance providers are here to help. For a hand up, apply today and call 1-800-506-5596. That's 800-506-5596. Or visit www.heat.help.
Civic Media promised you something big to celebrate our new and still growing network of radio stations. When we announced the one-day $1 million advertising giveaway for Wisconsin businesses, you responded.
Just wanted to echo your sentiments about the advertising. That's really a cool deal and really remarkable.
$1 million of free advertising. Now, if you missed this chance to work with our team, go to civicmedia.us and click on the sponsorship tab. One of our local sales pros will get right back to you. civicmedia.us and
You're listening to Mad Radio, WMDX 1580 AM Columbus, W224EG Madison, and always streaming on the Civic Media app.
ABC News, I'm Andy Field. Police now know more about the shooter Craig Sturgeon after yesterday's mass shooting in Louisville. Authorities say he was an employee at Old National Bank and legally purchased an AR-15 firearm earlier this month. Mayor Craig Greenberg urging state and federal lawmakers to pass gun reform laws, citing a state law that allowed seized guns to be auctioned.
The laws we have now are enabling violence and murder. It's time to change those laws to save lives and keep our people safe.
5 people dead, 3 others still in the hospital. President Biden is in Belfast, Northern Ireland, to mark 25 years since the U.S. helped broker the Good Friday Agreement that ended violence in Northern Ireland. Walmart says it's closing 4 stores in Chicago this Sunday. Company saying the locations have lost money over the years. Walmart saying all workers can be transferred to another store. This is ABC News. New Jersey's governor asking the state university system president to not seek an injunction, declaring a faculty strike is illegal.
In an email sent late Monday, Rutgers University President Jonathan Holloway says he's encouraged by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's request for representatives from the state's flagship university and its 3 striking faculty unions to meet in the State House for negotiations. Unions decided to strike on Sunday. They're demanding salary increases, better job security for adjunct faculty, and guaranteed funding for graduate students. The first strike in the 257-year history of the school is impacting about 67,000 students. Brian Clark, ABC News, New Jersey.
It's been a staple in American homes for more than 75 years, but it could be the end of the line for Tupperware. Company issuing a new warning saying it could soon go out of business. Sales are down 18% in 2022. Analysts say the company has struggled to connect with younger consumers. Andy Field, ABC News.
Download the Civic Media app now so you can listen to this brilliance anywhere, anytime. Brilliant! Mad Radio 92.7 WMDX.
For Civic Media News, I'm Terry Bell. Here's what you need to know. We know the names of the two police officers shot and killed during a traffic stop in northwest Wisconsin Saturday. They're Hunter Scheel and Emily Breidenbach. Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald says their families are asking for privacy as they plan their funerals. Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee is closing after graduation in May. President Dan Scholes blames a lack of money, rising costs, and low enrollment.
After examining all options, this decision was necessary. I wish there was a different path we could pursue.
Cardinal Stritch opened in 1937. A little more than 1,200 students are enrolled this year. In sports, the Brewers lost to the Diamondbacks last night. Corbin Burns starts for Milwaukee tonight. I'm Terry Bell, and this is Civic Media News.
Don't you deserve a job you love? Civic Media is preserving hometown radio, broadcasting from main streets across Wisconsin, and we're hiring radio advertising sales professionals to join our rapidly growing network of local radio stations. If you have a connection to your community, prior sales experience, and want to earn an outstanding living where you and your hard work is appreciated, you should apply right now. Find more information on our website, civicmedia.us. Click on the Careers tab.
You can't handle the truth.
We're here to dispute that. You can handle the truth. Mad Radio 92.7 WMDX. Accidents can be life-changing, no matter how careful you are. But with Gingras Thompson and Walks, you're not alone. For decades, they've been fighting for the rights of people just like you. They'll let you focus on your recovery while they handle the legal complexities. If you or a loved one has been hurt or killed due to someone else's negligence, contact them now. You may deserve compensation.
All into it, Gingras Thompson and Watts, GTWlawyers.com.
I'm Corey Bang from Mad Radio 92.7 WMDX, and here are some events that are coming up in the area. On April 12th, go check out Aofe O'Donovan and the Westerlies at the Stoughton Opera House. Show starts at 7:30 p.m. On April 13th through the 15th, go check out comedian Sam J at Comedy on Stage. Shows are at 7:30 and 10 o'clock p.m. On April 15th through the 30th, go check out Artemisia at the Overture Center Playhouse. Show starts at 7:30 p.m. On April 16th, on its last day, you could not forget about stopping on into the Dane County Regional Airport for the Flight of Lights. The light display starts at 7:30 p.m. And now, from July 16th, go check out Christina Ramberg's Vertical Amnesia at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. Current hours are noon to 6 p.m., Monday through Thursday. If you have an event you'd like us to tell others about, let me know. Email me at corey.bank@civicmedia.us, and we'll tell the community about it. We're Mad Radio 92.7 WNDX.
It's that time of year. Time for all the home improvement projects that need to be completed. There's that hole in the wall that needs repair. The kitchen and dining room need fresh paint. And isn't it time to finish that remodel project in the family room? Need help? 3 words. Drywall on Call. New construction, remodeling, repairs, painting, residential or commercial. The team at Drywall on Call believes having it done right is always money well spent. Log on drywalloncall.com or call 608-635-6061. 608-635-6061. Mad Radio 92.7 programming is produced live in the Solidarity Realty Studios. Solidarity Realty. There is an alternative.
Warning. You are about to listen to the greatest radio show ever. And due to contractual obligations and to shield our airwaves and corporate licensees from any semblance of liability, responsibility, and gullibility, we must tell you the views represented on this show are not necessarily those of this station or its management. This radio show contains differing points of view on current political topics, and due to the nature of its contents, it should be heard by everyone. Thank you for listening.
3, 2, 1.
Now live from the Devil Radio Studios in Madison, Wisconsin, where the political party is just beginning. Welcome to the Devil's Advocate Show. Friends proving it's never personal, only politics.
Please allow me to introduce myself.
Here is your host, Mike Crute.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show, the Tuesday edition, the happy hour. I'm always happy when John Nichols from the Nation, from the Cap Times come around. John, appreciate it. If you missed John, where were you? Now we're one. And you can always find the Devil's Advocates each and every day. Civicmedia.us. Find the greatest radio show ever. It's under the Devil's Advocate Show. And look for the podcast. And that was an excellent interview. John, appreciate you coming around. We got some breaking news. Chicago, WCPT 820 AM territory. Chicago, you have been awarded the DNC. Now, Milwaukee will host the RNC. That was sort of a troll move by the Republicans because, of course, Joe Biden was supposed to come to Milwaukee in 2020. It broke my heart when the pandemic set in and there was no live Milwaukee DNC. It was like a server room. It's as close as they came to Milwaukee. And I was hopeful as a Wisconsinite, as a guy who, something of a political junkie, love this stuff, do it for a living. Of course, I want to go to the party in Milwaukee for the Democrats, but the Republicans are coming here to troll us. And the Democrats are going back to the site of the 1968 Democratic Convention. Mayor Daley back then, I think it was kind of bloody and ugly. This will be a more peaceful thing, I suspect, with Joe Biden as the presumptive nominee. That assumes he runs, but I think if he runs, he's the presumptive nominee. And by the time 2024 gets here, and you may think that's forever from now, Crute. Not really. Not really. By the whole scheme of things, I'm surprised we don't hear more about the Republican campaigns launching and ramping up. Do you realize the first Republican presidential debate is coming to my backyard, coming to Milwaukee? We'll cover it for you right here on Civic Media because we have to, because it's newsy and it's in our backyard. But that's coming up August of this year. The presidential debates start this year. The elective cycle for the presidency starts this summer. And I don't know what the weather's like where you're at, but it's like 80 now. We skipped spring. We're already into summer. 844-967-2789. Oh, yeah, and it's moving day for the flagship here in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm still technically in one of the soon-to-be 2 Solidarity Realty studios. I'm broadcasting from the, University Ave location. Me and E-Bone still hanging out at the WMDX studios. But we moved today. Civic Media moved into our new world headquarters. Shiny, new, spacious location. And it feels good, but it was a lot of work. So, I'd appreciate some audience participation this hour because I'm going to need someone else to help me do a little more of the heavy lifting. So here's the number, 844-967-2789. We're going to talk about the political headlines. And just as a rando side, the worst move you ever experienced. If you had a really bad move, ours wasn't bad today. I've had some bad ones. This, not so bad. But if you've ever had a god-awful move that's worthy of talking about on the radio, today is your day. 844-967-2789. Moving day for Mad Radio. Heading to State Street, the world headquarters. So the move's already done, except the broadcast operations. We're still here, just me and E-Bone. Like a little desert island over here on University Avenue right now. You know who else is like a little desert island? Republicans. They're wandering. They're wandering in the desert right now. Jennifer Rubin offers a piece at the Washington Post. I'd like to start here, and then we'll get to your calls at 844-967-2789. The point I think Rubin makes, conservative judicial overreach is going to cost Republicans so many electoral heartaches. I mean, Dobbs is already stinging them. What should have been a red wave historically, Joe Biden wins, the Democrats win, and then the pendulum swings. And usually it's some sort of a pushback. I don't know why the American people always seem to do that. But with the Dobbs decision last June, well, that changed. It was a trickle at best, a modest majority in the House of Representatives. They didn't win back the Senate. In fact, they lost a seat if you include Fetterman. And now, the latest nationalized race was the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, something north of $40 million. Most grandiose expenditure in Wisconsin, or any Supreme Court race in our nation's history, because we elect our judges here. And it burned them. Talking about the conservatives. This anti-abortion position, they lost by double digits. Well, in the meantime, a Trump judge, a Trump appointee, has overreached and tried to overturn, 20 years of precedent. Let's go there. Jennifer Rubin, right-wing judges may cripple the GOP. U.S. District Judge Matthew Kaczmarek's widely panned ruling blocking the FDA's approval more than 20 years ago of an effective and safe medication, mifepristone, used for both medical abortions and to treat miscarriages, is another in a string of decisions from right-wing judges that may well boomerang on the MAGA movement. The decisions have revealed its true reactionary face. Kaczmarek's opinion, and she writes in parentheticals, which the Justice Department appealed on Monday and moved to stay, displays the three telltale characteristics of Trump-appointed judges' opinions. 1, contempt for the law. Sleight of hand on the facts and partisan language more appropriate to a MAGA rally than a courtroom. On the law, Kaczmarek ignored the 6-year statute of limitations on FDA challenges and trashed any semblance of standing, air quotes, as Rubin writes it. Kaczmarek said, and here's a quote from his ruling, any physicians who may treat patients who have side effects from medical abortions prescribed by someone else are sufficiently injured by mifepristone to sue, writes Mark Joseph Stern for Slate. Kaczmarek's logic would simply abolish the standing requirement. Did you hear that? This guy's decision would essentially abolish the standing requirement for lawsuits against drug approvals by creating a special exemption out of thin air. As Rubin writes, this is not the law. Moreover, the judge's reliance on the 1873 Anti-Vice Comstock Act smacks of utter desperation to find any rationale for his desired result. The law, which included a wildly overbroad ban on mailing anything that could be used in an abortion, was an obvious government prior restraint on speech. Comstock was largely invalidated by the Supreme Court's 1965 ruling in Griswold v. Connecticut. Here's a quote. Over 60 years ago, the interpretation of the Comstock Act, endorsed by Judge Kaczmarek, was already recognized as part of a bygone era, constitutional scholar Michael Dorf writes. He also notes that a December 2022 memo from the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel explained in detail that the relevant provision of the Comstock Act has long been read to forbid the mailing of materials only for illegal abortions. Federal courts held that position well before the passage of Roe v. Wade, he adds, and thus the ruling survived the Supreme Court's overturning of that law. Kaczmarek's ruling also makes factual assertions that are, and I quote her, she's quoting Kate Shaw from the New York Times, an op-ed, that are scientifically baseless and infused with hostility to abortion. Kate Shaw, as mentioned, is the author of this quote. She is a constitutional scholar. And more of the quote, including that the FDA failed to consider the intense psychological trauma and post-traumatic stress women often experience from chemical abortion. Now, Rubin quotes the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and says they lambasted the decision as inflammatory and brazenly substituting, and here's the quote, the court's judgment for that of trained professionals. I think Rubin's greater point is Trump appointees, conservative judges often replace the science with their heartfelt opinion and somehow turn it into a legal ruling. More from Rubin. As Kaczmarek's decision displays the voice of an overtly anti-abortion advocate, any pretense of judicial impartiality was dispensed with when he insisted on calling the fetus, and here's the quote, an unborn human, referring to fetal personhood and asserting that women who have abortions, and here's a quote from apparently the judge, Kaczmarek, often experience shame, regret, anxiety, depression, drug abuse, and suicidal thoughts. Given that Kaczmarek's decision has heaped fuel on the conflagration caused by the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Republicans might want to ponder, is this, the right-wing judiciary as a whole, a threat to the MAGA movement's viability? Is it? Are you kind of chopping yourselves off at the knees? I think so. Rubin obviously makes this point. I read on. It is one thing to gin up the base on invented threats from critical race theory or the great replacement theory. But when MAGA movement judges begin to inflict radically unpopular edicts on those outside the right-wing audience, that risks sparking a counter-response, a determined, broad-based movement insisted that the United States not turn the clock back on decades of social progress. Republican setbacks such as the disappointing 2022 midterms, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, etc. Let me finish her thought. Suggest that conservatives may have won the battle to stack the courts with ideologues, but might be losing the war for public opinion and ultimately electoral control. Now, she's got more in this piece. We'll come back. We're the devil's advocates. Your phone calls could be next. 844-96-PARTY.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council. What is dedication?
People ask, how your children learn how to ride a bike and you didn't? I just created an environment where they taught themselves, and all I had to do was be there.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
The Devil's Advocates.
Mitch McConnell did make a public statement, right? After he voted to acquit, nothing says the president can't be prosecuted. Set the example for your caucus.
Convince your caucus as to why the man is not fit to serve. How do you not use your leadership to say, you guys, this is crazy. We can't do this, and here is exactly why. Because now, of the two major political parties, one of them is under the thumb of a fascist insurrectionist.
Follow the Devil's Advocates on Facebook and Twitter.
Miss our conversations on air? Join the discussion on our social media channels. Find Civic Media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find social media for specific shows and hosts on our website. Go to civicmedia.us.
Here's your Mad Radio forecast. Mainly clear tonight with lows around 55. Winds out of the southwest 10 to 15 miles an hour. Daytime highs approaching 80. Tomorrow, clear skies. Clear skies and quiet again tomorrow night. Lows level off around 57. Dry with temperatures well above average Thursday and Friday, and highs in the upper 70s. For Civic Media, I'm meteorologist Eric Height. Currently, it's 75 degrees.
You're listening to the radio show your mother warned you about, The Devil's Advocates.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. You know, I thought of Peace Frog. I thought of this Doors tune when I mentioned the 1968 DNC in Chicago. I believe that's what they were talking about. I think that's what Morrison was singing about. DNC is coming back to Chicago. I hope it's a more peaceful affair. And I especially hope the RNC in Milwaukee in 2024 is a peaceful affair. Although the political parties we will be hosting, we're going to burn it down. I'm just saying. 844-967-2789. I just want to put a bow on the Rubin piece. She effectively writes at the Washington Post an opinion piece about judicial overreach, conservative judicial overreach. And this Kaczmarek ruling on mifepristone is legally unsound. It's very unpopular, and it's certainly going to create blowback. So just her conclusion, and then the phone calls, 844-967-2789. Appreciate the patience. Radical judges who would impose their will on modern America make themselves a target for a movement that pushes back on the court decisions and on the courts themselves. No wonder that there are rising calls for expanding the Supreme Court as well as lower courts to dilute right-wing judges' powers, limiting Supreme Court terms, and stripping jurisdiction from the Supreme Court. Support for progressive state judicial candidates, see Janet Protasewicz in my backyard, who vow to act as a counterweight to right-wing judicial imperialism, is almost inevitable. And she won big, if I didn't mention that. Republicans cannot very well tell their appointees to cool it. They certainly cannot contain the blowback their judges unleash. The greatest irony of Donald Trump's presidency might be that the accomplishment that most thrilled right-wingers may accelerate the vanquishing of a movement that is at odds with the values and sensibilities of most Americans. Let me read that one more time slow. The greatest irony of Donald Trump's presidency might be that the accomplishment, maybe it's me, maybe reading it slow is not going to help you, the audience. I got to read it better. The irony of Donald Trump's presidency, the greatest accomplishment might be that most thrilled right-wingers may accelerate the vanquishing of a movement that is at odds with the values and sensibilities of most Americans. We saw that at the ballot box on April 4th in Wisconsin. The final sentence here from Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post. The power of the judiciary itself may be one of the casualties. I hope John Roberts is listening and tuning in to the Devil's Advocates, just like you, at 844-967-2789. Dynamo Dave from Duluth. Welcome, sir. What do you got for us? Dynamo.
Oh, we got a heat wave up here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Dynamo. I didn't make it all the way to Duluth, but I was in Minnesota last weekend, man. Still got snow up there.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's pretty much gone now. We've had weather in the 60s here, and now it's getting, now we've got worries about flooding. But
Dynamo, Dave,
anyway,
I read something today. Before you go, I want to point out, you probably, living in Minnesota, will have a 2-year greater life expectancy than I will in the state of Wisconsin, or at least those that are Medicaid eligible and aren't getting it here in the state of Wisconsin. It has dropped our life expectancy on this side of the river, Dave. I mean, isn't it scary, man, that which side of the river you live on can affect how long you live?
it is. And actually, I think that's actually Scott Walker's fault. You guys could have had a high-speed rail going through your state, that would have served.
Yeah, rub it in,
Chicago,
Dave.
Milwaukee, Madison. No. I'd say he's the guy that contributes to your shortness, lifespan. Nothing else. Just Scott Walker being governor for how many years? 8 years?
It felt like forever. And you know what else, Dave? I'll give him this small little nod. Talk radio is so successful in the state of Wisconsin, and we as civic media, we're trying to grow all across this state, Dave. But we're so successful in the state because he refuses to expand the broadband. That was one of the other things. He kicked back a lot of federal money, like Medicaid expansion, But Scott Walker refused to expand broadband. You get outside of a county with a highway running through it. I mean, Dave, I don't know how the internet is in Duluth, but in rural Wisconsin, it sucks. And it's not their fault. They're affected tremendously by decisions made by some guy who didn't want to be seen receiving money from Obama.
Yeah, it's just totally insane. You know, states like Wisconsin put more money into the federal taxpayers. You know, the citizens of Wisconsin put more money into those coffers than take out. And people like Scott Walker just don't seem to understand that.
Well, under Scott Walker's budgeting, we spent more money putting people in prison than we spent on the UW system, on the university system here in our state. And Dave, we imprison twice as many Wisconsinites as you do across the river in Minnesota. We're apparently twice the criminals you guys are, because you spend like 1.3 billion per biennium, and we're spending like 2.6 billion per biennium to incarcerate Wisconsinites, about twice as many, Dave. So don't come over here. We're criminals.
Well, my brother lives there. He's lived there since '78. But in Racine, I visit him all the time. But I know I love Wisconsin. But the thing is, do they have like a lot of private prisons in Wisconsin? You know, the corporate prisons that are trying to make money.
Well, Scott Walker did, and Scott Walker keeps coming back to the former loser governor of the state of Wisconsin. He was a grandiose recipient, Dave, of CCA, I think was the company. The private prison industry gave a lot of money to Scott Walker when he was a state lawmaker, before he was even Milwaukee County executive. And Scott Walker actually is one of his few claims to fame is, I believe it was called Truth in Sentencing. It basically kept Wisconsinites in prison longer. And of course, he famously, as the governor, failed to pardon any Wisconsinite for any single crime. 0 pardons. By contrast, the Democratic governor, Tony Evers, I think he's up to something approaching 900, a state record. Trying to keep people out of prison. Come back. More Devil's Advocates will keep you out of jail, at least till 6.
Looking for more local programming? Check out our website, civicmedia.us, to see our entire lineup.
ABC News, I'm Andy Field. Police now know more about the shooter, Craig Sturgeon, after yesterday's mass shooting in Louisville. Authorities say he was an employee at Old National Bank and legally purchased an AR-15 firearm earlier this month. Mayor Craig Greenberg urging state and federal lawmakers to pass gun reform laws, citing a state law that allowed seized guns to be auctioned.
The laws we have now are enabling violence and murder. It's time to change those laws to save lives and keep our people safe.
5 people dead, 3 others still in the hospital. President Biden is in Belfast, Northern Ireland, to mark 25 years since the U.S. helped broker the Good Friday Agreement that ended violence in Northern Ireland. Walmart says it's closing 4 stores in Chicago this Sunday. Company saying the locations have lost money over the years. Walmart saying all workers can be transferred to another store. This is ABC News.
Thanks for listening to your local Civic Media radio station. Learn more on our website, civicmedia.us.
This is Pat Kreitlow from Up North News Radio, inviting you to join us every weekday morning from 6 to 8 a.m. Up North News is your online home for stories that are unabashedly Wisconsin. We cover the latest out of the state capital, of course, but we also celebrate this amazing state with stories about people and places, food, events, history, and more. You can find our work at our website, upnorthnewswi.com, or search for Up North News WI on social media and subscribe to our newsletter too. Then, each morning, I get you caught up on the latest headlines, plenty of weather checks, a little sports. We do a daily music break and a history lesson. We have newsmakers, insiders, community leaders, and all kinds of other guests and regulars. And we take the time to break down an issue or a story and explain it in plain English. Catch Up North News Radio weekdays 6 to 8 here on the radio, the Civic Media website, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Folks, I tell you this much, the Cripes Cast is just the butter on my cheese.
Cockroaches, not that bad. They call them palmetto bugs in South Carolina. Same thing, you can call them up here.
Are they really palmetto bugs?
Yes. Yeah, and they're a great source of protein. They're going to be the lobsters of the future.
They also got salmonella, and they can lay like 40 eggs at once.
Well, they gotta work out a few kinks there, okay? They gotta work out a few kinks.
Cripes Cast every Saturday and Sunday at noon across Civic Media and on the Civic Media app.
As a veteran of our country's armed services, you may be experiencing hardships, but we are clear in our mission. No Wisconsin veteran should ever have to face homelessness or lose heat, power, or water again. Apply today by calling 833-WIS-VRAP. That's 833-947-8727. Visit VRAPWI.com.
Hey, Brad from Zero Res Madison here. What's the best way to clean your carpet? Well, not surprisingly, it's the same way you clean your clothes. You wouldn't clean a dirty shirt by running a white cloth over the top of it, nor would you try to get it clean by sprinkling chemicals and rubbing it in. For a real clean, you need hot water, agitation, and a cleaning agent, just like your laundry. For a fresh, healthy clean with no residue, call Zero Res Madison or schedule online. Zero Res, spell it forward or backward, it's the right way to clean.
Ready for our little forest adventure? Yes! There's a forest closer than you think. Find a park or forest near you and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by USDA Forest Service and the Ad Council.
I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling devil's advocates.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates Radio Show, the Tuesday edition, the Happier Happy Hour. Rolling through it with your phone calls. 844-967-2789. Another headline we're going to get to soon. Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, that's Dom's buddy, he has sued Congressman Jim Jordan over his campaign to intimidate and attack. So I like this. This is very aggressive from the Manhattan DA. Back off, Jim Jordan. But to the phones, don't back off there. 844-967-2789. Against my better judgment, welcome to Tuesday's edition, CJ. CJ.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Hey, congratulations on moving.
Oh, it was a little bit of work, man. Where were you? CJ, you're a big guy, man. You could have helped me carry some couches and stuff.
I would have too. Then you would have kicked me out of there, but
I'd have thrown some beer your way at the end, man. That I would have been good for some beer, CJ.
I'm looking forward to having a couple with you. But I just got to tell you, if you were going to bring up Bragg, there's so much I'd love to discuss with you. How you misrepresent the fact that Democrats don't care about the baby the day before it's born.
Sure they do.
And
20-week abortion ban was the law of the land in the state of Wisconsin before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Tony Evers is trying to restore that same status for women. That would be a 20-week abortion ban.
Have you seen a 20-week ultrasound?
Yeah, I've seen my kids. I remember, and we chose, to carry our kids to term. But you know what? I'm not there to tell some other woman who may have had later medical complications or a number of things could have happened, CJ.
Okay, so but see, the Democrats and Chuck Schumer voted on the floor of the Senate with no restrictions all the way up to the day before the baby was born.
Well, I saw Mark Jefferson for the Republican Party said they should have made that argument in the case of Dan Kelly, but the failure to do so left Dan Kelly very vulnerable to accusations that
you lie. See, Rudy,
I never lie.
The truth about what Republicans believe. Okay,
I'm just reading the article out of the Journal Sentinel, CJ. Read a paper, man.
Until Lindsey Graham's right, until the Republicans define what their restrictions are, and I certainly have evolved on this. If you wanted to know my limitations, I'd tell you, but I kind of agree with Lindsey Graham.
That's anyone that says I kind of agree with Lindsey Graham's in trouble from the get-go, CJ. But let's try to find some common ground. Let's find some common ground.
State where the Republicans should fall, and that was 16 weeks, and also include the rights for rape and incest, and that's kind of where I hope that it lands. But
wait. So you would
decide now.
Let me ask you.
And you lie, and that's what I mean. You misrepresent what the actual issue is, and you do it very successfully.
But I'm not trying to misrepresent. I'm trying to understand you, CJ. Slow down for a second. Did I hear you say that you think that there should be an abortion ban after 16 weeks, and there should be a exception for, let's say, rape, incest, or is it fair to say health of the mother if the mother's life is in?
Yeah.
So that's what you're for, CJ.
Well, that's what I think. It's that, there has to be.
I would share your opinion in a lot of ways, CJ. I'm not here to split or knit any picks. But what I would say is that's not the law of the state of Wisconsin.
What's your limitation?
My limitation is
how many weeks?
Well, it's certainly beyond a complete abortion ban like the 1849 law. And you know what, quite frankly, I'm not a medical professional.
Still haven't stated it. What's your limit?
Point of viability.
You won't state it.
It continues to go down because we are seeing that the point of viability has gone down through medical science. What's that?
What's your limitation?
Medical viability. When the child can live on its own outside the fetus or outside the womb.
How many weeks?
I don't know, man. Ask an OBGYN, CJ. I don't know why we got to argue these points. You told me there is a reasonable compromise. I would meet you at 16 weeks and those exceptions. And I'm not an OBGYN, and I'm not a woman, nor are you, CJ. But I'm not trying to cast that upon you. That is the reality in the state of Wisconsin. We are under an 1849 abortion ban. No exceptions for rape or incest. And the last gubernatorial candidate, if you'll recall, on the Republican side, was with like 9% of Wisconsinites that think that's the right balance. And when Republicans bring forth what they call moderation, which would be a simple exception, but would not restore legal rights to abortion up to 16 weeks or any other time frame, unless you're willing to go and report that your uncle raped you, that you're an incest victim, and then you get your pass to get the abortion, CJ. So I'm not trying to cast your opinion for you. I actually think your opinion in this case, and it's a rarity, CJ, is somewhat reasoned. 844-967-2789. Let's leave it at that for now. Stephen from Green Bay. Stephen, appreciate you calling and listening. What do you got for us?
Well, I won't be as difficult as your last caller, I promise.
No one could be.
But I will. But I will say this: it is a good day for people like me in the state of Wisconsin, and I just want to send my condolences to CJ, who is probably a little vexed that he keeps getting swallowed up by the blue wave that keeps resurfacing through the state every election cycle. I can imagine how frustrating that probably is for him.
Well, Stephen, I'm sure you recall what it felt like to, be on the losing end of the Scott Walker recall or the 14 election or the 14 election. Anytime Scott Walker got elected, I was disappointed. But the worm turns eventually. And I really think that if this is where Republicans want to stake their position, Stephen, against the will of Wisconsinites, against the will of Americans, it's going to be a lot more electoral losses, man. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Now, I'm going to age myself a little bit here, and not the way you think I am. Actually, when Walker was elected, I was not old enough to vote, so I had no say-so in that race. But I will say now, I do have a voice, and unfortunately, the Republicans have nothing to offer. And I think the Republicans know they have nothing to offer, and that's why their tactic is division. And, you know, people are starting more and more every day to become more educated when it comes to politics. And that's also not very good for the Republican Party because, as Donald Trump said himself, they bank on their voters not being educated. So those two things, mixed with a whole cocktail of other stuff, I think it's going to be a very sad time in history to be a Republican.
Well, Stephen, I think you're right, and I appreciate your call and your listing. And, you know, they need to take a differing tack. You do the same thing, you expect a differing result. Well, the landscape has changed, so they are getting differing results, and they're losing. They're on the losing end. And these aren't coin flip elections. These are ass kicking. You got your lunch handed to you kind of elections. Right, Dan Kelly? And again, you cannot spell Kelly without two L's. 844-967-2789. Aaron, listening in Minnesota. How you doing, Aaron? Welcome.
Good, thank you. I would submit to you that 2 callers ago, he's actually pro-choice, even though he sounds like he's pro-life.
He's
really
very
is pro-choice.
He's very conservative, and he's a frequent flyer. He comes around, and we've known this guy for years. I think he believes most of what he says. But it's generally opposition to whatever the Democratic position is. And I don't think that I don't know any Democrats that are, you know, for abortion up to the point of birth. And quite frankly, most Republicans have some reasonableness in them and are willing to find some point of compromise, be it 16 weeks and exceptions for rape or incest. I think, Aaron, if that was the line in the sand, I think most Americans could live with that. But we don't find compromise anymore, do we, buddy?
No, we don't. That's the whole problem. You're all on one side or all on the other. There's no moderation. There's no moderates, or the ones who are moderates or independents or independent moderates or moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans. Yes, they're getting fewer and fewer by the day, month, year. It's insanely absurd. But I would submit to you this, and the reason why I really called was about the abortion drug.
Yes, sir.
Now, if somebody mentioned this before, I might have missed it. I didn't catch the whole show today, but let me say this. I would submit to you that if this right-wing judge is making a decision to outlaw this, and it's going to effectively affect the whole country, isn't he really affecting in the long run, maybe not in the immediate term, but in the long term, isn't he affecting his pharmaceutical companies who pay for these lobbyists to lobby and throw tons of money into right-wing agenda politics? Isn't he really hurting the right-wing pharmaceutical executives and the right-wing pharmaceutical companies by outlawing the drug?
Maybe in some small way, but Aaron, I don't think the industry in and of itself, and I think they have been supportive of trying to keep this very safe 20-year established medicine on the market. But rarely do I defend the pharmaceutical industry. But I don't think this is about bottom line profits. I don't think they're making so much per dose that it's about the money in this case. This is clearly about someone inserting their religious opinion into a legal decision. And it's just horse, you know what, Aaron, if you read it, it's horrible.
Granted, but don't you think it's going to set the precedence for other drugs? Like, okay, I know, was it your show? I heard you guys talking yesterday about, okay, now we're going to outlaw Viagra. Maybe it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But really, when you think about it, is it? Viagra has side effects. Gabapentin, if you take it for nerve pain or epilepsy or seizures, gabapentin, the generic name for Neurontin, can have side effects. We can go on and on and on, right? All these meds have side effects. So effectively, can that not set the precedence, though, for future drugs to be outlawed?
Oh, absolutely, Aaron. Absolutely. For ridiculous and even as Jennifer Rubin and I shared, and Aaron, thank you so much for listening on KTNF 950 AM, the progressive voice of Minnesota. But Jennifer Rubin talked about, it was beyond the statute of limitations, they don't really have standing. These people that filed these lawsuits aren't really harmed by the mifepristone. In fact, they may not even be the people that prescribed it. 844-967-2789. Another friend across the river, Amy in Minneapolis. Welcome, Amy. What do you got for us?
Hi there. I was interested in your idea, sort of compromise.
Yes,
but
ma'am.
I don't think of my bodily integrity should be like a bargaining chip.
No, fair enough. I completely
And
understand that, Amy.
I read the Post and the Times and the New Yorker online, and you read stories now of women who've paid for these, horrendously expensive assisted technology things to get pregnant, and they get things like their water bursts, and they were turned away in Florida and in Texas. The chance of those babies at a certain point in the pregnancy actually surviving to be actually born, it's like nil.
Yeah.
And they were forced to carry them, and they both nearly died. And they told them, well, if you start to, you should hopefully stop bleeding profusely in a couple of hours, but if it starts again, come back. How many times? And they practically died. One of them lost half the blood in her body. And other things happen in pregnancies too. And
Amy, I got to cut you short. The Washington Post piece is out there. It talks about 2 Florida women. One nearly died. Come back. More Devil's Advocates, more of your calls.
The Devil's Advocates.
U.S. Senator Ron Johnson, our friend, live via phone. What about simply raising the age of weapons purchases to 21 years of age?
We're sending 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds over to Afghanistan, and they're dying. They ought to be able to vote. They ought to be able to have a beer, and they ought to be able to buy a gun to hunt with as well.
Are you suggesting we lower the drinking age?
No. Can't they do that now? What is the age nowadays?
It's 21, sir.
We drink when we toast. We toast when we drink.
Yikes.
You are never far away from your favorite local radio station. We're always streaming on TuneIn and the Civic Media app, and we invite you to get social with us by following our network's Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages. Want even more? civicmedia.us.
Here's your Mad Radio forecast. Lows around 55 tonight, under mainly clear skies, southwesterly winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Daytime highs approaching 80. Tomorrow, clear skies. Clear skies and quiet again tomorrow night. Lows level off around 57. Dry with temps well above average Thursday and Friday, and highs in the upper 70s. For Civic Media, I'm meteorologist Derek Height. Currently, it's 75 degrees.
60% of the time, they're right every time. The Devil's Advocates.
Welcome back to the Devil's Advocates radio show, taking your phone calls. Last segment of today's big show, but we try to do a town hall style round here. 844-967-2789. A very nice lady, Amy from Minneapolis, admonished me. I was effectively negotiating her abortive rights with CJ, a conservative caller who offered 16 weeks, and I believe exceptions for rape or incest. And then I got him to talk about the health of the mother, and he said, yes, that would also be an exception. But that is not the current law in the state of Wisconsin. We have a ban on abortions, an 1849 law. And Amy, I certainly, and I feel properly admonished, but the remedy, at least in our state, coming from the fact it's illegal now, probably will have to be, well, could be struck down by the courts, but that's going to put us in a different sort of constitutional chaos. But there may have to be a legislative compromise reached. And if we ever get the fair maps, if they ever overturn the most partisan gerrymandered maps in America, the ones we suffer under here in the state of Wisconsin, well, we would talk about a legislative compromise. But Amy, I feel properly admonished. I certainly don't want to negotiate away your rights as a human being and a woman. It's your body. I get that, Amy. So my bad. 844-967-2789. Those that listen long enough know I'm occasionally insensitive. Danny from Watertown, welcome.
Yeah, one thing that's always troubled me is why, if they're going to argue against abortion, do they always have to lie? And I think of a hearing that was taking place in our legislature in the Senate, because Alberta Darling brought in like this wackadoodle internet guy, and then I don't know what he said, but the arguments of like abortion causes breast cancer and all these things that they're telling. I mean, the whole idea of fetal heartbeat is baloney, because you don't really have a heart beating till way after they claim. I mean, they always use these falsehoods. They don't have facts to back them up, and then they go to lying.
Well, and you probably heard Dom and I arguing about faith the other day. If their premise starts with some sort of faith in God and Jesus, and they believe that God decided, and therefore I think they try to find justification legally or whatever the case may be, Danny, but really what they're trying to accomplish is what their faith tells them, of course.
So it's okay to lie.
Well, it's strange to me that, there are, what do they call them? Pregnancy care clinics or something, where they will perform ultrasounds and they will expose the pregnant person to this fetal tissue within them, but they don't actually provide any sort of abortive care. And in fact, many times they give misleading information, healthcare information and other information, tell people how much they'll regret that. And, my understanding is there is no evidence to support that is the case.
Correct. They're evil, and they are a woman will come in and they will thwart her efforts to her freedom. They will do everything they can to deny her choice. They will lie. They'll say, "Oh, there's nothing available. We can't see anything here, so come back in 2 weeks," when it's past her 6 weeks or whatever the limit is in that state. I mean, they're atrocious. And the tax dollars are going to support these clinics, which are anything but. They provide no health care. They are like anti-health care centers.
No, Danny, I know. Appreciate your call and your listenership. I was at a Wisconsin State Capitol, a committee hearing, and they were trying to defund Planned Parenthood. This was while Scott Walker was still the governor, and there was a gerrymandered Republican legislature, so they controlled the committee and the flow of the testimony and all that kind of stuff. And at one point, there was someone that testified about services provided to men by Planned Parenthood, testicular cancer screenings and different STD screenings sort of care. And a very contemptuous Republican state senator, Chris Kapinga, and he can hear me in his district on WAUK 540 AM, but Chris Kapinga couldn't even believe that any men were served. And I think the number was something north of 6,000. And we have seen a reduction in just even the general healthcare that is provided by Planned Parenthood. And of course, they defund these organizations, as Danny mentioned, under false pretense, often under false pretense. 844-967-2789. Gene, listening perhaps on KTNF 950 AM. Welcome from St. Paul, Gene.
Correct. That is what I am listening through. Thank you very much for taking my call. I know that calling in to radio shows isn't really going to change anybody's mind, but I just want to put some facts out there. Since Tennessee has banned abortion, the increase of suicides among pregnant Tennessee women has gone up 6%. Women are literally dying because of the right wing. And the right wing is incredibly hypocritical. In Israel, the access to abortion is widespread. It is free. It is funded by money and that the government has, and the government of Israel gets, I think, $4 billion a year from the United States. So these right-wingers, Texas, are paying for abortions. They just happen to be in another country. In the Jewish religion, it is the case that human life is believed to begin when a baby takes its first breath, which means it's out of the womb and it starts breathing. And the banning of abortion for Jewish women then in states like Florida is religious discrimination. So I don't think anybody's mind is going to be changed by the facts, but I think the amount of disinformation that the right wing continually vomits out on people is terribly distressing.
But Gene,
Gene,
I cut you only short because we're short on time. I don't think people are being fooled any longer. I mean, look at the electoral outcome here in the state of Wisconsin, our Supreme Court race. This was effectively a blowout. People want these rights restored, and I think gerrymandering and mass shootings and differing things probably factored in, but there was no doubt it was the Dobbs ruling. It was the loss of the rights. And here in the state of Wisconsin, Gene, abortion is illegal for the first time in my lifetime.
Yeah. And I would just say, God love you for having this discussion, but even having to listen to you and CJ talk was just enraging to me, because as a woman, I'm sick of hearing men talk about whether or not I should have certain rights and when, even when they are supportive of me. Do you know what I mean?
Gene, you got to listen to our friends Kristen Bryan, Jane Mataneer, as goes Wisconsin. I know you're on the wrong side of the river, but get this Civic Media app. I am certainly not the only voice around here. We do have some female voices. They represent the empowered caregivers. Two fine females. They got the governor of the state of Wisconsin tomorrow, Tony Evers. Stick around. Civic Media. Thanks for.
It's that time of year. Time for all the home improvement projects that need to be completed. There's that hole in the wall that needs repair. The kitchen and dining room need fresh paint. And isn't it time to finish that remodel project in the family room? Need help? 3 words. Drywall on Call. New construction, remodeling, repairs, painting, residential or commercial. The team at Drywall on Call believes having it done right is always money well spent. Log on drywalloncall.com or call 608-635-6061. 608-635